The film begins with a childhood video recording of two brothers, Brian and Danny, who are playing in Turtle Beach, Texas, with their dead parents. However, all those fond memories have now turned into the distant past, as the world has been devastated by a deadly virus pandemic known as the Doomsday Virus. The virus has killed almost the entire world population. Brian and Danny are now adults accompanied by Brian's girlfriend Bobby and Danny's friend Kate. They travel in a stolen car to a hotel in Turtle Beach that Brian and Danny use to visit with the family every summer. To stay safe, they follow strict rules created by Brian. The first rule is to avoid all infected people in any way because their breath is very contagious. Secondly, they must disinfect all items touched by the infected person in the last 24 hours. Thirdly, they believe that infected people cannot be saved and will certainly die, so there is no point in trying to help them. Anyone who breaks this rule will definitely not survive. Shortly thereafter, Brian and his friends meet Frank and his daughter, Jody, whose car breaks down in the middle of the road due to running out of gas. Frank offers to exchange his food supply for a small amount of gasoline. Although they still have plenty of gas, Brian remains vigilant and forbids Frank from approaching. After Kate sees Jody wearing a bloody mask in the car, it becomes clear that Jody has already contracted it, and most likely Frank has also been infected. With that, Brian immediately drove away from them. Unfortunately, while avoiding Frank through the shoulder, their car's gas hose breaks and the engine dies completely. They also engaged in heated debate. Bobby and Danny want to help Frank by delivering petrol and hitchhiking, while Brian and Kate balk as Jody is clearly already infected. However, eventually they agreed to walk to meet Frank wearing masks and gloves, carrying gasoline and cleaning supplies such as bleach. When meeting Frank, Brian threatens him with a gun. Frank explains that he is heading to school in Farmington to pick up the Doomsday Virus serum he heard on the radio, and it is likely that many others will also be waiting in line. Brian does not believe him because he thinks there is no serum that works, and Bobby increasingly heats Brian to shoot Frank. However, they eventually agree to Danny's proposal to try the serum in Farmington, on the condition that Frank and his son have to sit in the back with a tightly draped plastic barrier. In addition, the inside of the car is also cleaned with liquid bleach before they leave. After that, they stopped briefly in the previous car to take a photo of Brian and Danny who were left behind. When they were finished, they continued their journey. On the way, they chatted casually about the early life of the pandemic. Brian tells him about his job as a gravedigger for virus victims, while Danny tells him about his scholarship at Yale University. Brian had a joke with Bobby, which made him not focus on driving until the car almost skidded. The jolt sends Frank crashing into the bounding plastic, and Kate attempts to resist the duct tape. Without them noticing, the duct tape had opened a little. Frightened, Kate got out of the car and tried to calm down. At that time, they saw another car nearby and intended to take the rest of the gas. However, since his gas tank is locked, Danny must retrieve the key that is still hanging on the steering wheel while avoiding a pile of infected corpses. Suddenly, the corpse awakens to Danny's surprise. In the evening while camping, Jody asks about a photo of Brian and Danny as children. Danny also told that they used to have a father like Jody, and the place in the photo was Turtle Beach, a very pleasant place for them. As children, Brian and Danny often spent time there with their parents. Danny also explains that their goal is to go to a hotel on Turtle Beach that has been abandoned to be used as a base camp. They hope to find the remains of basic necessities there and wait in the hotel until the situation is completely safe, either until they are rescued by rescue teams or until the pandemic ends. Suddenly, multiple shots rang out from a distance, and two cars appeared chasing a man. Quickly, Brian instantly turns off the campfire to keep their location undetected. Long story short, after arriving in Farmington, which seemed quiet and seedy, they went straight to school. Meanwhile, Jody waits in the car with Bobby. However, when they arrived at the school, no one was there. They only found many empty hospital beds with dirty pillows full of blots and still hanging infusions. Shortly afterward, they saw a small child walking toward the sports field, where a doctor was standing with a group of other children. It turned out that all the children had been infected. The serum they had could only suppress the virus for 3 days, after which it would reactivate. The doctor planned to end his life with the children by drinking a poisonous solution, a very heartbreaking decision. Seeing this, Frank does not have the heart and forces Brian to give up his gun so that he can shoot the doctor. However, Brian refuses, so Danny immediately takes the gun from his brother and throws it at Frank. Frank then points the gun at the doctor to stop his intentions. The doctor, desperate, explained that they had run out of energy 2 weeks ago and that all their resources had been used up. Hearing this, Frank feels very resigned and realizes that the hope of saving his child, Jody, is almost gone. While in the car, while chatting, Jody suddenly coughed and could not get up to take her breathing apparatus. Since Frank did not return, Bobby decided to remove the plastic barrier while wearing a mask and gloves to help Jody. However, when Bobby is about to put on a breathing apparatus, Jody coughs up blood that hits Bobby. Meanwhile, Frank and the group are on their way back to the car. Bobby immediately closed the plastic barrier and hid his jacket splashed with blood without telling the others about the incident. Most likely Bobby has already contracted the virus from Jody. After that, Jody asked to go to the toilet not far from the car. Frank is worried that if he accompanies Jody, Brian and the group will escape with their car. Therefore, Frank asks Jody to go to the toilet alone. However, because Jody's condition is too weak, Frank is finally forced to carry Jody to the toilet. Meanwhile, Brian begins to unload Frank and Jody's belongings along with their oxygen cylinders, intending to leave them immediately. Danny feels sorry and asks his brother to wait, but Brian has already decided to leave, and they end up leaving Frank and Jody at the place. After leaving Farmington, Brian and his friends clean the back of the car, while Bobby secretly throws his jacket covered in Jody's blood under the car. Later, they decide to spend the night in an already empty and abandoned luxury hotel. While they were exploring the place, Brian found a corpse dressed in personal protective equipment around the pool. When Brian approaches the corpse, he is shocked and flopped, but Danny quickly helps him. After that, they plan to play golf. However, Brian performed a speeding stunt with a golf cart, resulting in the car rolling to the ground. Brian asks Bobby for help to help him wake up. However, Bobby hesitates for fear of contracting something to Brian, but ends up helping by using a golf club to pull him out. Suddenly, Brian pulls Bobby to the ground and intends to f*** him. Bobby is very angry with the reason that the sand is dirty. After that, all of them, except Bobby, were busy playing golf until they broke the glass in the hotel. However, one of the golf balls went into a room that turned out to be full of sterile clothes, drugs, bleach, weapons, and other items. In addition, there was the sound of someone on the walkie-talkie calling out Larry's name, who lived in the room. The voice said that he and his group would soon arrive there. In the evening, Kate attempted to use a coin phone at the hotel to call her parents who were being quarantined on a cruise ship. However, Bobby said that Kate's parents must have died because the world situation has been very chaotic after the pandemic. Suddenly, the sound of a group of people's footsteps was heard and their flashlights were visible. In a panic, they ran and hid, but just as they were about to get out, they were finally caught. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, Brian, who was drunk, saw a pile of cars and cages containing horses parked in front of the hotel. Shortly after, a man in a hazmat suit approaches Brian. Brian, who was aware of the man's presence, tried to attack him, but finally a group of people came with Brian's friends who had been arrested. It turned out that the hotel had already become the headquarters of the group. Larry, one of their members, was supposed to guard the hotel, but he had already been found dead by Brian in the pool before. After they were collected, Brian and friends' cars were searched. The severity of the group forces Kate and Bobby to join them. However, one of the members disagreed and they had an argument. After that, Kate and Bobby are forced to take off their clothes to check if they are infected or not. Brian was furious because he couldn't do anything about it, considering that there were more of these groups. However, everyone is shocked when Bobby and Kate take off their clothes, and it is revealed that Bobby is already infected. Upon learning that Bobby is infected, Brian and his friends are immediately expelled from the group. They all look very anxious, especially Kate, who is sitting next to Bobby. Since the gas was running out, Brian decided to make a short stop at the nearest gas station. Danny sees the place of the memorial altar for the victims of the virus, which is decorated with their photographs. Kate reminds Brian that the three of them will not survive if Bobby stays on board. Danny goes to Brian to discuss this difficult situation. Brian already understands this harsh reality, but he finds it very difficult because he loves Bobby so much. Not finding the key to the gas station, they decided to continue the journey. Brian sees a road sign indicating a town 2 miles away. After a moment of reflection, with a heavy heart, Brian asked Bobby to come down and give Bobby half a gallon of water as provisions. Bobby is devastated and persuades Brian to take him with them. However, Brian remains on his stand because he does not want to endanger the lives of Danny, Kate, and himself. It was a sad day for Bobby. They continued their journey with misgivings because gasoline was running out. Suddenly, they were met by a car carrying 2 women. Brian immediately stops their car, and Danny tries to persuade them to give a little gas. Danny uses a variety of excuses, from claiming to be a kind person to saying that Kate is pregnant and needs urgent care. However, both women refused and intended to leave. Brian became frustrated and determined. He got out of the car and shot the 2 women. One of them managed to return fire and hit Brian's right leg, but Brian managed to shoot him back and beat them. After that, Kate took gasoline from the woman's car without guilt. Meanwhile, Danny is still shocked and angry at Brian's actions in shooting the two women. Danny hits Brian, feeling that Brian is getting less and less merciful and too brutal. Brian fights back and gives an ultimatum, saying that all this time Danny was too weak and did not dare to make a decision. Brian reminds Danny of how they left home, and it was he who dared to take a gun from the drawer of his parents' room to protect them. Brian also brought up the lies he had made against his parents who were already infected with the virus, saying that they would come back again. This was their last meeting. Brian alludes to Danny's silent attitude when Brian throws Bobby out and insists that all his decisions are for the safety of both of them. After traveling several miles, they came to a house where all the doors and windows were covered with wood. However, there was one window on the second floor that was still open. Out of curiosity, Danny decided to get into the house by getting on the car. But when Danny entered, he was surprised to find the body of a dead woman. Danny then takes the mask and shotgun from the corpse. He also saw a dog eating its owner's body. At first, the dog does not bother Danny, but the situation turns chaotic when Danny takes drugs and accidentally drops one of them, which makes the dog attack him. Danny had to finish him off. Afterwards, Danny treats Brian's gunshot wound. However, Danny was very surprised when he saw his brother's skin condition that appeared red patches, a sign that Brian had contracted the doomsday virus. Despite this, Danny continues to give alcohol to Brian's wounds. They continue the journey with Brian sitting in a plastic-restricted back seat to prevent the spread of the virus. They listen to a radio broadcast from a woman who sings resignedly because her electric generator is about to shut down. In the evening, they stopped and lit a bonfire. The atmosphere was sad because Brian's condition was getting weaker and his words began to make no sense until he finally fell asleep. However, Brian still holds a gun, and when Danny is about to pick it up, Brian suddenly wakes up and tells about his experience as a gravedigger of doomsday virus victims. There are some of the bodies he buried still moving when inserted into the burrow. Brian also cried, telling how tragic his and Danny's life was after they ran away from home due to the pandemic. After Brian faints for a moment, Danny takes the gun along with his car keys. However, when Danny gets into the car, Brian gets back up and walks over to him. Then Danny realized that the right key was still held by Brian. Kate gives Danny her gun, and he has to prepare to shoot his brother if Brian won't give his car keys. Brian insists that Danny and Kate take him all the way to Tittle Beach. They also negotiate pretty tough. But not wanting to get infected, Danny was forced to kill his own brother and cremate his body. After that, Danny and Kate continue their journey until they reach their destination, Tittle Beach. Danny feels empty because he has lost many people, including his parents, Frank and Jody, Bobby, and especially his brother Brian. Danny's goal to the beach is to repeat his childhood with Brian in the middle of a world that has been very chaotic. Danny and Kate also go to check on the hotel, which is fortunately empty and not controlled by anyone. Danny is still pensive looking at the beach atmosphere that continues to remind him of the good times with his family that will never return. The message of this film is about how fragile human relationships are when faced with difficult situations. The film doesn't just focus on the virus, but rather on how humans are tested with difficult choices between survival and morality.